I can well remember actually living at the dealership because my bedroom was above the motorcycle showroom and it always smelled of castor oil. Welcome everyone, my name is John Hawkins and I welcome you to my motorcycle museum. I would like really to name this collection of motorcycles my dollar earners. Because of the war, England built up Great Britain built up a big debt which they owed, amassing many millions of pounds to the USA and to Canada especially. And these machines were built to be exported. 70% of all vehicle production after the war had to be exported to pay for the war, which included obviously motorcycles. We paid our final debt off to America in December 2006. And it is reported that the interest accrued was equal to the original debt. So we were very grateful that the motor manufacturers after the war and motorcycle manufacturers of war produced these particular machines which were accepted into America and help us to clear our debt to America. Several of these machines I can remember being delivered with cardboard at the local railway station where we picked them up on trailers and brought them back. I'm very fortunate to have these machines renovated. Some of them became in a very dilapidated state by Mr. Les Willis of St Austell. And together we have put together, which we think is a very fine collection of machines, mainly dated after the war. But there are some old and interesting machines also on view, and the oldest machine is a 1912 NSU, and we have some pre-war machines such as a Rudge holster and a Sunbeam side valve. My pride of place in the museum has obviously got to go to my father's bike that he bought brand new in 1928. I think he paid £78 for it. He was a motor mechanic at the time in a town called Truro, who, by the way, he worked for a company who supplied the first car in Cornwall. However, he had to sell the machine later on to form a business here in the village of St Stephen's here in Cornwall. It was in the 1970s that a gentleman came to me and said, "I think I've got your father's machine in my orchard." And we went down to inspect it, and here's a picture of the machine that we found in the orchard. And as you can see, the registration number, Cornish registration number, is still visible, because in those days they used a lot of lead in the paint, and of course it lasted a very long time. The machine was renovated by a Mr. James of Leominster, who unfortunately is no longer with us, but he did an excellent job, and I did ride the machine lots and lots of times, but it's here at the moment on the display in the museum. My father was a Scott dealer after the war. He sold several Scotts, and on view here we have the range of Scotts from 1948 Scott up until the last few models that were produced in the late 1950s. This machine here is the Ariel Square 4, 1000cc, in beautiful condition. Unfortunately, it's not. I don't really own this one, but it's been on loan to me, and I'm very grateful for the owner. Obviously, people will know that it's a 4-cylinder machine, and little bit of difficulty of overheating, as is well known, the rear cylinders of the machine. Another Ariel which is I particularly like is the Ariel Red Hunter here, which is produced here after the war. It has no rear suspension, but is a beautifully prepared machine. I particularly like all the instruments here. built on top of the tank, which it makes it rather unique to aerial after the war. This is an aerial cyclone, made very famous because Buddy Holly in America bought one of these and made this particular model quite exceptional. I'd like to introduce to you the Royal Enfield, quite a very famous mark of machines, and very early manufacturer. In fact, they produced what they call a quad cycle a long time ago. Unfortunately, this manufacturer gave the rights to manufacture to India to manufacture the machine, where there is some 200,000 of these produced annually. Such was the reliability, especially of what we call the single-cylinder Royal Enfield bullets. We have also the Constellation over there with a fairing. And to make it rider friendly, they used to produce a fiberglass fairing, which is an additional extra of £12, 10 shillings. And here we have the 500cc twin version as well. They were produced at Greenwich. They were reliable machines, and they also produced dispatch rider spikes during the war. During the war, their factory was in an underground quarry at Bradford-on-Avon, where they carried on production. I'm very fortunate to have in the collection a 1951 Vincent Rapide, which I took back on a deal of supplying a second-hand Austin 1300 way back in the 1970s. This, at the time, was the fastest production machine, if you like. They did make a version which they called the Black Shadow, which was the fastest machine. But this company started well before the war by a man called Davis, and I understand he was a pilot in the Royal Flying Corps. And while he was a prisoner of war, it is, I think, noted that he designed the engine of the Vincent. First of all, it was a 500cc, I understand, and then developed into a V-twin. Quite a nice bike to ride in as much as it's very, very powerful. And I think you would agree with me that the engine layout is absolutely mind-boggling and is a real credit to the designer. I have a collection of Nortons, starting off with a lovely Featherbed 600cc Dominator. We also have on display the red one, which was made in this particular colour for the export market. This is a Norton International, which obviously was produced by Norton to be raced. Not completely successful, because the most successful machine at that time to be raced against was the BSA Gold Star. This is a Model 50 Norton with a featherbed frame. Not many of these in existence, because people chop them up to use the frame to make what we know known as the Triton. The Norton Commando has one of the probably the first British bike to have an electric start. The Norton Commando was a very successful machine that was exported, and for many years was voted the machine of the year. This I used myself quite a lot, and I finished my motorcycling days riding this particular machine. This, as we all know, is a Panther. Panther was the first motorcycle manufacturer to use the chain as the rear drive. The Panther was specially made for sidecar work, and if you wanted one to use as a solo, it was to a special order. We have a range of Triumphs here. Very fortunate to have the 1938 Speed Twin with the girder forks that changed a little bit of motorcycling history as far as engine design was concerned. We have the Tiger 100 here, the alloy engine 500cc. Great export bike at the time, nice bike to ride, and quite a successful bike in its day. This is a Triumph Thunderbird. After the war, as I said, we were exporting motorcycles to America. They wanted something a little bit high-powered, so Triumph brought what we call the 650 Thunderbird onto the market. This particular model has a sprung hub, which wasn't very successful. The machine made quite popular by the film stars at the time. Marlon Brando, for example, used one of these in the film called The Wild One. I'd just like to say something about Triumph, because Triumph after the war were not financially viable, and they were near to bankruptcy. And there was so we're told, a member who was working for them, and they were disappointed that Triumph didn't enter the competitive world of racing for motorcycles at the time. And it was understood that one of the employees, unbeknown to the management, made a machine that entered the TT. And it was nothing to do with Triumphs at the time, but it was a kind of a private entrance, and believe it or not, he won the race. And the gentleman concerned was called Ernie Lyons. Believe it or not, this proved to give immediate success to Triumphs in the marketplace, and kind of revived them, and of course went on then to be a very popular motorcycle, and as we all know, being made today, obviously under different ownership, but is a successful motorcycle production in our country today. Variations here of the Thunderbird here, 1957 Thunderbird, and moving on here to the famous Tiger 110. Later development of the Tiger 110 included the panel work here around the rear wheel, etc. This is a Triumph Trophy. Machine actually was used in the ISDT endurance event by a Cornishman, and it's an all alloy engine, and Steve McQueen made this machine very popular, and the Great Escape. However, during the war, this engine was used for generators on the Lancaster bombers. So it did, if you like, made a contribution during the war effort. Very famous machine. Unfortunately, it doesn't belong to me, it belongs to a friend of mine. This is a Works AJS that was used in the ISDT, used by the Works rider Gordon Jackson. I have in the museum a special exhibition on the Snowston Speedway. After the war, a speedway track was created quite near here at a place called Parr. The speedway was very popular, so much so that on the opening of the stadium way back, that 12,000 people attended. And we must remind ourselves that the population of Cornwall at that time was about the same size as Plymouth. And it is also recorded that the highest number of people attended was something in the region of 16,000. This is the type of the machine that was used at the time. The engine was built in those days by a company called Jap, very, very famous, who made industrial engines and even aircraft engines. And as you can see, it has no brakes and no gears, no gearbox either. And we had quite a famous members here in Cornwall who rode Speedway. And one of my friends was called Chris Julian, who was a Speedway rider, quite nationally known. He was also a gyrocopter designer as well. In fact, he built a gyrocopter and had its certificate of airworthiness. Quite a clever chap, bearing in mind that he could hardly read or write. But unfortunately, by testing someone else's gyrocopter in Gloucestershire, he was killed when the aircraft failed. Other Speedway riders we have is the well-known Bomber Harris, who was born in a village not far from here. He was the British Speedway champion in 2007. He was also what they call a long track champion as well, and is still riding Speedway very successfully. I'd like to point out, just as a matter of fact, that at the Park Stadium in 1952, the helicopter visited the stadium. It must be remembered that people in Cornwall didn't really see a helicopter, so it was quite popular that we should go along to see probably our first helicopter. The helicopter landed and then went to take off, and unfortunately there was a failure, and so much so that the helicopter crash and loss of life occurred. Very sad occasion for the stadium. Here is a program here of a special visit by a Speedway rider called Bill Kitchen. And in the display are several programs of Speedway. Just like to point out, if I may, the people who developed the track. This gentleman here, Mr. Jack Luke, gave the land, or didn't give the land, but was associated with the Speedway on his land at Parr. At this time, I'd like to say that my family has been involved in motorcycle racing. In fact, 4 generations of my family have been involved in motorcycle racing, and at this precise moment, I have 2 generations still involved in motorcycle racing. So we are quite keen to have this machine here as a display of what happened in Cornwall many years ago. Particular NSU, which was first registered in a little village called Grampound in 1912. This I'm particularly proud of because it was swapped in on a car with my father before the war, and he kept it ever since. Around here we have the BSA Gold Star, where I often wonder how they used to ride these machines in scrambles and motocross. Very heavy machine. I myself did a bit of scrambling, but I could never manage one of these because I was never strong enough. But indeed, you had to be a very strong man to race one of these. And the BSA Gold Star, as we know, was very successful in this type of sport. Here we have a B33 supplied by me new, and that's a 500cc single. Quite a good machine, very reliable. Now this is supplied by us originally after the war, a 650 Golden Flash. Very reliable machine. Probably, I would like to say that if I had to choose to go from here to Scotland this afternoon, I would probably choose this machine out of my collection of over 50 machines here on display. Probably not the fastest, but they're extremely reliable. Variations of the Golden Flash is what we call the Super Rocket. As we see, this has had a alloy head and various tweaks, if you like, to make it a little bit faster than the Golden Flash. This is a lovely shooting star, a 500cc version. Local machine, as you can see. Very docile machine, and as you can see, it's very attractive, and it's metallic green and black, of course. This is the A65, 1962, 650 machine, which we supplied new, and this is the last machine that we supplied new before we gave up motorcycle agencies. Fortunately for us, the man came back and bought a Reliance three-wheeler, so we had the availability to keep this machine in my collection. This is a one-owner BSA 250. Would be a good example, if you like, of a working man's bike who would be working locally and would take his lady for shopping on a Saturday afternoon. This is a one-owner bike which we supplied new. We all then go on to the BSA Bantam. We all knew that this was originally a German-designed engine. The design of the engine became available after the war to the troops going through Germany into the DKW factory, picked up the drawings, and was given to BSA, and BSA changed the controls, the gear change and the brake for us in Great Britain, because we always used the brake and the gear change on the opposite sides. This is a very old BSA flat tanker, 1926, and very, very reliable machine at the time, an extremely popular version. I'd just like to mention, if I may, about BSA, because they were a massive company, at the time the biggest producer of motorcycles, and I would just like to record that in 1910, BSA started in Birmingham. And first of all, they were involved in making rifles. And believe it or not, the Turks ordered some 20,000 rifles that they made. But the achievements really of BSA are in the Second World War. And I'd just like to read, if I may, what they produced. And BSA produced, in the Second World War, 1,250,000 Lee Enfield rifles, 404,000 Sten guns, 500,000 machine guns, 42,000 Hispano cannons, 59,000 Beza machine guns, 68,000 anti-tank guns, 126,000 military motorcycles, and 128,000 military bicycles, 10 million shell fuse cases, 4 million magazines, and 750,000 anti-aircraft rockets. And they also produced the famous Daimler Scout cars, and unfortunately the company went bust in 1972. It's quite to realise that such a vibrant company where productivity was quite incredible during the war, that they should be no longer with us. Very, very sad. We have 4 machines here in a line, which gives an example of 4 engine types that were used. First of all, I'll start off what we call the Rudge All-Star. And this engine is a single cylinder with what we call a twin port, in as much as it's got twin exhausts. This, in 1938, this particular machine that doesn't belong to me, it belongs to a well-known ex-speedway grass track racer, and a champion at that, Richard Eslick, who lives locally. This machine in 1938 was the fastest production machine, and Reg was an old established company, and as a matter of fact they were responsible for the introduction of the knock-on wire wheels that we used to see on sports cars years ago. One design that I particularly liked, being my age, was the easiness of putting the machine on the stand by raising this lever here, which helped you to put the machine on the stand. The next machine here is a side valve engine of a Sunbeam, again a very old company that was eventually taken over by BSAs. And this machine was coupled up to a sidecar and used by the local China Clay Company, hitched up to a flatbed sidecar, which was used by the carpenter on the company. The next machine was produced after the war when it amalgamated with BSA, and this is a Sunbeam S8, and it is a shaft drive, and as you can see the engine is in line and it has a car type clutch and a crown wheel and pinion. Unfortunately, the machine was not tested completely, in as much as it was delivered onto the market and had certain problems, and one was the crown wheel and pinion. But it was a lovely bike to ride, and they also made a bigger version with balloon tires. The next machine is one of the oldest companies existed, way back in the 1890s, by two brothers that made machines in Bristol. They had, at the time, the Royal Warrant, and they made thousands of machines, dispatch riders' machines, in the First World War. You will notice that the engine is what we call a flat twin. This is a 350 version. It also had a different type of front forks, which we call the Earls types front forks. There's only about 600 of these machines were made. They were not very popular because they were only 350cc, rather expensive, and the performance was not good. And eventually the firm, if you like, went into liquidation. Quite a shame. One of the oldest motorcycle manufacturers started in 1899 and started production in 1901. Made bikes for the First World War. And although Matchless was also built the HIS company in the 1930s, they also made engines for the very famous Morgan three-wheelers. Also made engines for a famous motorcycle called the Bluff Superior, which was used by Lawrence of Arabia, and and also made something in the region of 80,000 motorcycles for the Second World War. Can I just say at this stage that the dispatch riders that were used during the Second World War were made by Royal Enfield, Norton, Ariel, Matchless, and HIS. And it's hard to believe that we made, in the Second World War, 400,000 motorcycles as dispatch for dispatch riders, which just amazes me, continually amazes me, the productivity that was achieved by our country during the Second World War, when we made thousands of Lancaster bombers thousands of Spitfires, thousands of tanks, etc., and thousands of motorcycles. The productivity must have been incredible, and dare I say it, probably never been achieved by this country since. Here we have the 1954 AJS 350. This would be quite a popular bike at its time, a real workhorse. Here we have the AJS CSR 600cc twin, which was quite an upmarket bike at the time, and quite an attractive looking bike. It's a machine called an Excelsior, and as you can see, it's quite an old machine, pre the First World War. The word Excelsior is a Latin word for ever upward. And they were made in Coventry, and they were the first people to make the penny farthing. And in World War II, they made a motorcycle, a fold-up motorcycle for paratroops. One of the successes they had was they had a racing success by winning the German Grand Prix in 1936, and I understand there were 200,000 people attending that Grand Prix. Unfortunately, the company folded in 1965. This motorcycle was made especially for ladies, and as you can see, it's called a Mackenzie. Very few were made. I understand there's only about 100 of them were made, and as you can see, the price was 26 guineas. I just wonder how they got on in the rain, because the carburetor faced the elements. But here it is in the museum, rather interesting and probably quite unique. I'd like to introduce you 3 bikes which are rather unique, and all three manufacturers were involved in the very famous Isle of Man TT. First of all, here the Velocette. This particular bike is a Velocette Venom, but Velocette had many TT successes, and they produced machines that were used for the UK police force, and they were very popular in America for desert racing. This is a Venom which had a top speed of about 100 miles an hour. You notice that the engine is rather distinctive because the camshaft which operates the valves is driven by a series of gear wheels concealed behind what is known as the Map of Africa timing case. Velocette finished production of the Venom in 1968. It also produced a racer called the Velocette Truxton, which is, if you have one, is worth quite a lot of money. Moving on to probably the most successful racing machine ever produced is the Manx Norton. It won the first TT ever, which was in 1907 in the Isle of Man. And believe it or not, it had a Peugeot engine. And it's rather ironic that here we are in a Peugeot garage and saying that this make of motorcycle won this extremely popular race by using a Peugeot engine. In the World War II, they did supply well over 100,000 machines for dispatch riders and later produced the rotary working type engine. The production of Nortons has recently been revived. It may be famous to record that the GTs were won by Jeff Duke and John Surtees, and they were world champions in 51 and 52, while John Surtees became world champion on motorcycles and Formula One, was the only person to become a double world champion. The Manx Norton had a maximum speed of 130 miles an hour and was available to the privateer if he wanted to go racing. The third machine is the very famous Gold Star, produced after the war. It is a machine that I used while I was in the Royal Air Force. I used a 350 version of the Gold Star, And I used to travel from Cornwall back to camps where I was posted in Lincolnshire, Lancashire and Gloucestershire. And in those days, there were no motorways, and the A38, for example, went through the centre of Bristol. But it proved a very reliable and fast machine. These machines are very popular in museums in as much as they are worth quite a lot of bit of money, but unfortunately there are many of these fake machines on the market, and you must be very careful in purchasing one to make sure it is an authentic machine. In 1963 the machine was finally ceased production because of the magneto production. Lucas, who supplied the magnetos, stopped production, and therefore this machine was taken out of production. At that time it cost £330 in 1963. So these three machines were well represented in the Isle of Man TT, which is a grueling race of 34 miles per lap, and the rider has to remember no less than 234 corners. Well, I come to the end of my little show of my little museum. But I am extremely proud of my museum because in the year that I was born, which was 1936, there were no less than 34 British motorcycle manufacturers in our country. Obviously, some of them use the same engines, engine manufacturers, and I think it's unfortunate they all fell apart because they were more enthusiastic in producing a motorcycle than keeping a business altogether. But we are very grateful, we must be very grateful to these motor manufacturers who helped us after the war to pay our debt back to America and to Canada. And in this respect that I'm very fortunate to have this collection. And if you do like to come along, you're most welcome to come along at any time. The only time I close the museum is on a Sunday, and the admission is entirely free. We are very proud here at our museum here at St Stephen's on the A3058, and as I say, admission is completely free.